Our daughter went to Brown University, and when she talks about having brown friends, she distinguishes between her brown friends and her brown friends. So I have a brown thumb, as you can tell, but it's not just brown. I also have a brown thumb in the sense that my plants die. I've never been very good growing things, but people keep supporting me and trying to help me be successful. Eventually, you'll see the slide. Chris plowed out extra sod in our first home so that my secretary, who was raised on a farm in South Dakota, could garden with us. The garden thrived under her direction and help. When we moved, I put in a small vegetable garden, but the weeds inevitably took over by July each year. I finally abandoned the garden after 3 years. We turned our thermostat way down at night and during the day while at work, so only the spider plants, which are impossible to kill, by the way, hanging in the kitchen bay window were the only house plants that survived. We resorted to growing japonica species of plants and pines outside, all hardy in Minnesota winters, and they were beautiful. And I accepted that I was an indoor plant mother failure. We now live in New Mexico, which averages 293 days of sunshine a year, and the desert climate would not support the shrubs and trees we cherished in Minnesota. The window blinds in our house open top down instead of raising bottom up. It lets in less heat as well. Therefore, I either have to hang plants in holders at the top of the window, making watering a pain as I've shrunk to under 5'1". My only other alternative is to hang plants on a wall near one of our many skylights. In case we never see the slides, I have a picture of one that decided to take a honey-kitty leap from the wall and is scattered across the bathroom floor. Tragedy struck in March 2020, pre-COVID vaccine development and distribution. Following the death of my mother due to COVID, my own serious bout with COVID, and Chris's 2 visits and an overnight stay in the hospital for COVID, our daughter was afraid I would slip into a deep depression. Her fear deepened after I was exhausted from having to pack and vacate my mother's apartment in 2 weeks when her residence would not grant us an extension. Mom had a separate entrance to the outside, so they permitted me to come and go as I needed, but I was still very weak from COVID. We were grateful that Reverend Todd and Reverend Chamey were able to conduct funeral services via Zoom, and we tried to resume some semblance of our prior lives. Kara's solution was to ensure I was actively engaging with life and to encourage me to fill the house with plants. She touted the proven benefits of adding plants to reduce stress, speed recovery from illness faster. There are other therapeutic benefits, boost productivity, improve one's outlook on a closed environment, and improve the air quality in the house. She posited that the variety and colors would enhance the joy of caring for living things and brought several plants with her on her next visit. And there's a slide with her and repotting all these plants. As I said, I have a brown thumb, so it was the last thing I wanted to do. Kara is currently down to about 40 indoor plants after a high count of over 70. She assumed that her joy would also be my joy. Not so much. After many experiments and failures, I finally have some success in growing plants. So what have I learned? I discovered that my experience learning how to grow plants has been similar to my path in Jodo Shinshu. I'm attending a Zoom class led by Reverend Kenneth Tanaka, and his book titled Jewels is one of the required readings, and many of you I know are very acquainted with it. It is an excellent introduction to Jodo Shinshu Buddhism and reminds me that I have so much to learn. Reverend Tanaka says that he derives the title of his book, Jewels, from the Buddhist teachings that sees all living things as precious jewels, where each shining jewel is located where the strands cross one another in the vast web of universe and form an outer net of jewels. He cites the metaphor identified as Indra's net of jewels in the scripture, the Flower Garland Sutra. Each jewel is unique in its shape, size, color, and texture. Each is needed to illuminate, there we go. Just page through. See, that's my dead plants. This is Cara trying to help me repot. Go ahead. There we go. Thank you. Each is needed to illuminate the nearby jewels and is valued for simply existing and for being an integral part of the net of jewels. Similarly, we are individuals also unique in our appearance and personalities. Next slide, please. Next, he describes an inner jewel in each of us waiting to shine forth to help us realize awakening. The aim of Buddhism is found in the Lotus Sutra. The sutra teaches that the pure and fragrant lotus flowers grow out of the mud of a swamp rather than the clean loam of an upland field. So from this muck of worldly passions springs the pure enlightenment of Buddhahood. It teaches that the mud symbolizes our shortcomings and unhappiness. Nevertheless, we strive to avoid the same mistakes and aim for happiness. When we are successful in our endeavors, we come to understand the lotus flower of improvement and happiness. There is so much more that sutra means, and I hope over the next few years I learn to understand more of it. The lessons learned from my plants have similarly assisted me as I studied the way of practical attainment. Next slide, please. I see buds today nurture the plants into maturity and enjoy the continued growth or flowering of plants thereafter. Sometimes I experience the decline and eventual death of a plant, which is very disappointing and results in sorrow. However, I do not accept defeat and gather my strength to try anew. Reverend Tanaka explains that in order to continue on the path to enlightenment, I must accept that I cannot expect to remove worldly desires today, to remove attachments and evil desires tomorrow, and to get enlightenment the day after. Trying to care for a variety of houseplants has taught me that I must be observant, consistent in my care, and cognizant of the differences between species, and to recognize that each plant has its own special needs and care requirements. I finally figured out which plants need more direct sunlight or filtered light, which like to have more saturated roots known as wet feet, or require drier conditions, and how to eliminate fungus gnats that live in plant soil. Things were proceeding nicely until our return from Iceland. We do not have any family here, and no neighbors we know well enough to ask to water the plants. Therefore, I placed the plants into the oversized corner tub in the second master bath, set watering bulbs in the larger plants, saturated the others, and drew the blinds to admit only indirect sunlight. Next slide, please. The results were not entirely disastrous, but I lost a very finicky orchid, this one, and the purple shamrock plant from the earlier slide. And then we had several severely damaged plants. Instead of admitting defeat, I accepted my losses and started anew. One of my orchids is recovering, but it may be another 2 years before it blooms again. One I had to throw away, and I had to severely trim plants and also took cuttings from the healthy parts of remaining plants to root in water to replant and start over. Next slide, please. I'm also facing the reality of trying to grow orchids in this very low humidity climate. So I purchased that silk orchid plant in the interim. That one I'm unlikely to kill. My Monstero, which I got as a very small cutting, recovered and is flourishing right now. We are lucky to have several indoor plants that are thriving. And we have roses outside which bloom prolifically. Next slide. The Japanese cucumber plants which bear beautiful fruit, and the shiso and our transplanted pear cacti are flourishing. We have also cultivated a relationship with a neighbor who I can ask to water my plants while we're away on our next extended trip this winter. These lessons are a concrete reminder that I need to practice perseverance and understanding the teachings. I look to uncover messages that a first, second, or 20th reading finally reveals some of its meanings to me. I have learned to accept that I only understand a modicum of wisdom being shared and must continue to seek its truths. Like my plants, I must nourish my spiritual self and be consistent in my practices, recitations, and studies. Next slide. Many of you know I'm a card crafter, so I will leave you with this sphere of becoming a truly successful plant mother. In the interim, excuse me, I continue the path to enlightenment. Thank you for listening, and may you continue to follow your own path.